The garden had grown wild over the years. Ivy climbed the fence, roses tangled with thorns, and fallen leaves carpeted the stone path that once gleamed with care. Emma pushed through the tall grass, her shoes damp with morning dew, when she saw the bench. It sat beneath an ancient oak tree, paint long faded, wood weathered to gray. Yet something about it demanded attention. The bench was not just furniture, it was a witness. Its slats bore initials carved with youthful hands, its armrest polished by decades of touch. It looked tired, yes, but dignified, as though it still guarded secrets spoken in whispers long ago. Emma brushed off a layer of moss from the backrest. Letters appeared, Forever, J and E. The carving was rough but unmistakable. She caught her breath. Those were her grandparents' initials. And you watching this story unfold, think about it. Have you ever come across an old object in your family's home or garden, something ordinary yet filled with memory? A chair, a locket, a book that seemed to hum with stories? Share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear what family treasures have spoken to you. And don't forget to subscribe to Years Ago Stories so you won't miss the next journey into the past. Emma sat down cautiously. The bench groaned under her weight, as though waking from a long sleep. She ran her fingers over the carved letters. The wood was split in places, but the promise remained. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine the day it was carved. A young couple, laughing, pressing their initials into the bench as though to declare their future to the world. When she opened her eyes again, the garden seemed quieter. Even the birds held their song. Emma felt as though she had stepped into a memory not her own. That afternoon, she carried the discovery to her grandmother, Margaret, now well into her 80s. Margaret's eyes softened the moment she saw the sketch Emma had made of the carving. "I thought it would be gone by now," she whispered. "But promises carved into wood, they outlast almost everything." Emma leaned closer. "You and Grandpa?" Margaret nodded, her smile faint but wistful. "Yes, that bench was ours. Every evening after chores we sat there. He promised me a future, and I promised him my trust. Life was never easy, but those words kept us steady." Her voice faltered. "We carved them the day before he left for the service. He said, 'When I come back, we'll sit here again.' And we did, for years." Emma felt her chest tighten. "So why was it forgotten?" Margaret's gaze drifted to the window. "Because promises, even when kept, can fade in memory. After he passed, I couldn't bear to sit there. The bench became too heavy with silence, so I left it to the garden." Emma thought of the ivy wrapping around its legs, the way the wood seemed both fragile and unyielding. She realized the bench was more than furniture. It was a ledger of love, of vows kept and moments lost. That night, Emma returned to the bench under the silver glow of the moon. She traced the initials once more, feeling the grooves as though they were alive. She whispered, "What other promises do you hold?" The bench creaked softly, as if answering. And Emma knew her search was only beginning, because sometimes the most ordinary objects carry the loudest echoes if only someone is willing to listen. The next morning, Emma returned to the garden with a notebook in hand. She sat on the bench, brushing aside the ivy, and began sketching the initials more carefully. The wood's grooves were uneven, carved by nervous young hands, but beneath the roughness lay conviction, a promise strong enough to outlast weather, time, and even grief. She noticed something she hadn't seen the day before. Beneath the initials J and E, another faint marking stretched across the lower slat. The letters were weathered, nearly erased by rain and Sunday. Emma squinted, tracing them with her finger until the shape of words emerged. "Always here." Her heart skipped. Someone, perhaps her grandfather, had added more than initials. He had written a vow. Emma hurried inside to show her grandmother. Margaret leaned on her cane, studying the sketch with trembling fingers. "Oh," she whispered. "He did write it." Emma leaned forward eagerly. "So it was Grandpa's?" Margaret's eyes glistened. "Yes. The night before he left for the service, he pressed those words into the bench. He told me, even if I don't return, I'll always be here. I thought the seasons had washed it away. Emma felt her throat tighten. Why didn't you tell me? Margaret looked down at her lap. Because promises carry weight. For years after he came back, we sat on that bench together, grateful the vow had been kept. But after he passed, I avoided it. It hurt too much to see those words alone. That afternoon, Emma decided to dig deeper, literally. With gloves and a small spade, she cleared the ivy completely from the bench's legs. The earth was damp, roots tangled, but as she worked, she discovered a small tin box buried just beneath the soil, tucked against one of the bench's feet. Her pulse quickened. She brushed the dirt away and opened it carefully. Inside were folded notes, yellowed with age. The ink had bled in places, but the words were still legible. Promise me we'll raise our children to know kindness. Promise me we'll forgive quickly even when it's hard. Promise me we'll return here every year no matter what. Emma's hands trembled. These were not casual scribbles. They were vows exchanged between her grandparents, tiny scraps of paper placed in the earth as if to let the bench guard them. Emma read the notes aloud to her grandmother. Margaret's eyes filled. I remember now. We wrote them together one spring evening, folded them, and tucked them under the bench as if planting seeds. We believed promises grew stronger if the earth heard them too. Emma pressed a hand to her chest. And did you keep them? Margaret nodded. Most of them, yes. Not perfectly, but as best as we could. Life tested us, but the bench reminded us who we wanted to be. Emma sat back on her heels, staring at the weathered bench. She realized it wasn't just furniture. It was an altar of sorts, where love had been pledged and tested. The old wood held not only initials and words, but the weight of 2 lives bound by commitment. She whispered, "What else do you hold?" That night, Emma returned again under moonlight. She sat quietly, listening to the crickets and the whisper of leaves. The bench creaked softly beneath her, as if shifting to make room for her presence. She thought she could almost hear voices layered in the air, echoes of laughter, whispered vows, the murmur of dreams exchanged long ago. In that silence, Emma felt a tug in her heart. Perhaps the bench wasn't done keeping promises. Perhaps it was waiting for someone new to sit upon it and make their own. The following afternoon, Emma found her grandmother in the sunroom, knitting slowly, her gaze distant. On the table lay the tin box Emma had unearthed from beneath the bench, the scraps of promises spread out like fragile relics. "Grandma," Emma said softly, "I want to know the stories behind these. Not just the words, what they meant when you wrote them." Margaret's fingers stilled. She looked at Emma, her eyes clouded with age, yet glimmering with memory. "Then sit, child. Some promises are seeds, and seeds deserve their stories told." Margaret leaned back, her voice low but steady. It was spring, 1952. The garden was smaller then, neatly kept, the oak tree younger but already strong. Your grandfather had just asked me to marry him. I was frightened. War had left scars, and the future felt uncertain. But we sat on that bench, the smell of lilacs in the air, and he said, "Let's make our promises here, where the earth can listen." So we wrote them on scraps of paper, silly scraps torn from grocery lists, receipts, whatever we had. We folded them and tucked them into a box, buried it beneath the bench, and vowed to return to it when we felt lost. Emma touched one of the notes. "Promise me we'll forgive quickly, even when it's hard." She asked, "Did you keep this one?" Margaret's lips trembled into a smile. Not always. There were arguments, slammed doors, long silences. But that note reminded us to soften, to choose peace over pride. Without it, I don't know if we would have lasted. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the garden beyond. There were hard years, when money was scarce, when illness came, when grief visited our home. Sometimes the promises felt impossible. But sitting on that bench reminded us of the people we had once been, the boy and girl who believed enough to carve their initials and say, "Forever." Emma listened, captivated. She realized the bench was more than a relic. It was a lifeline, a reminder that their love had survived storms, not by accident but by intention. Margaret reached for another slip. "Promise me we'll return here every year, no matter what." Her eyes filled. "We tried. For decades we did. Each anniversary we sat there, even if only for a few minutes. But after your grandfather passed, I broke that promise. I couldn't bear the bench without him." Emma's heart clenched. "Grandma, it doesn't mean you failed. It means the promise mattered so much that keeping it without him was too painful." Margaret's eyes softened. "Perhaps. But promises are strange things. When kept, they strengthen us. When broken, they haunt us. That bench has been both my comfort and my sorrow." Emma returned to the bench the next morning, journal in hand. She studied the carvings again. This time, she noticed faint scratches below the vow. "Always here." Letters worn almost smooth. She copied them carefully into her notebook until they revealed words, "For the children yet to come." Her breath caught. She hurried inside to show her grandmother. Margaret pressed a hand to her chest. "I had forgotten that. We promised not only to each other, but to you, to all who would come after." "We wanted our love to outlive us," Emma whispered, "and it has. I'm here because of it." That evening, Emma sat alone on the bench, under the starlit sky. She imagined her grandparents young again, whispering vows with trembling voices, pressing hope into the wood grain. She could almost hear their laughter, see the fireflies dancing around them. The bench creaked under her weight, not in protest, but in welcome. She realized it had been waiting not just for her to sit, but for her to listen. She placed her palm on the wood and whispered, "I hear you. I promise to remember." For the first time, Emma understood why the bench felt alive. It wasn't magic in the wood itself. It was the weight of words spoken there, promises kept and broken, tears shed and laughter shared. Every vow had seeped into the grain. Every memory etched itself into its slats. The bench had become a silent witness, holding together decades of love and struggle. A family shaped by promises, whispered when the world felt uncertain. When Emma returned inside, she told her grandmother, "These promises aren't just yours anymore. They belong to all of us. If you carve them for the children to come, then we must carry them forward." Margaret smiled, weary but peaceful. "Then perhaps the bench hasn't been forgotten. Perhaps it was waiting for you." The following Sunday, Emma invited her mother, Ellen, and her uncle David to the house. Margaret agreed reluctantly, nervous about exposing memories she had buried for decades. Still, she knew the time had come. The bench had resurfaced, and with it, the promises carved into its wood and buried in its soil. They gathered in the garden at dusk. The oak tree loomed above them, its branches swaying gently as if leaning in to listen. The bench stood waiting, its carvings faintly visible in the fading light. Emma set the tin box of promises on the seat. Ellen crossed her arms tightly. "I can't believe you still keep this old thing," she said, her voice brittle. "It's nothing but rotting wood." Margaret shook her head. "It's more than that. This bench has heard vows stronger than steel. Your father and I carved our hearts into it." Ellen's face softened, then hardened again. "So why did you never tell us? We grew up here, sat on that bench dozens of times, and yet we never knew." Margaret's eyes filled. "Because promises are private until life proves them. We wanted you to live your own story, not carry ours." David leaned closer, studying the carvings. "So these initials J and E, that's you two? And these notes?" He opened the tin box, scanning the scraps with widening eyes. "Promise me we'll forgive quickly, even when it's hard. Promise me we'll raise our children to know kindness." He looked up, his voice low. Mom, you buried these? Margaret nodded. Together. Your father believed promises should be planted, like seeds. He said if we placed them in the earth, they'd grow into us. David's lips trembled. And did they? Margaret smiled faintly. Yes. You and Ellen are proof of that. But Ellen wasn't convinced. If these promises shaped us, why did we never hear them? Why keep them hidden until now? Margaret's voice shook. Because love isn't always easy to explain. And after he died, the bench became too painful. I couldn't bring myself to sit here, let alone tell you about the words carved into it. Silence was easier than remembering. Ellen's eyes burned with tears. But silence left us with emptiness. Don't you see? We thought you simply let the garden go. We thought the bench meant nothing. Emma touched her mother's hand gently. It wasn't nothing. It was everything. We just didn't know. The air grew heavy, the oak branches creaking overhead. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then David said softly, "Maybe it's time the promises belong to all of us, not just to you and Dad." Margaret's shoulders sagged with both relief and sorrow. Yes, they were made for us, but they were written for you, for the children to come. Ellen inhaled sharply. So every time we sat here, we were sitting on vows we never heard? Margaret nodded. Yes, but vows don't vanish when hidden. They shape us in silence, too. The kindness you show, the forgiveness you sometimes struggle with, it's all part of the promises planted here. Emma spoke up. Then let's not keep them buried anymore. Let's make this bench a place for all of us again. For new promises, as well as old ones. David smiled faintly. I'd like that. Maybe this time, the promises won't just be between two people. Maybe they'll be for the whole family. Ellen's tears finally fell, streaking her cheeks. She sat heavily on the bench, running her fingers across the faded letters. Then let's start now. Let's promise not to let silence steal from us again. Margaret reached out, clasping her daughter's hand. Yes, that is one promise I can keep. The evening ended with the four of them seated together on the bench, the tin box of promises resting in the center. The setting sun bathed them in amber light, as though blessing their reunion. For the first time in years, they didn't feel divided by grief or silence. They felt bound by promises, remembered, reclaimed, and renewed. The bench creaked softly beneath their weight, not with strain but with contentment. It had waited decades for this moment, and now it carried not just the echoes of old vows but the birth of new ones. The following weekend, Emma decided it was time for the whole family to see the bench. She called her cousins, her aunts, even the younger children. They gathered in the garden, curious, whispering among themselves as they walked down the ivy-lined path. The oak tree stood tall, and beneath it, the bench waited. No longer just a piece of furniture, but a witness ready to testify. Emma placed the tin box of promises on the seat. This, she began, her voice steady, is where our family's vows have lived for decades. Grandma and Grandpa wrote promises here, carved them into wood, and buried them in the earth. This bench is part of who we are. The family leaned closer. Some gasped at the initials carved into the backrest. Others touched the wood reverently, as if it might speak. Emma read aloud one of the notes. Promise me we'll raise our children to know kindness. Her cousin Sarah pressed a hand to her chest. That's what Mom always said to us growing up. I thought it was just her advice. I didn't know it was a vow planted here. David nodded. Because promises, when kept, echo louder than any silence. You lived it without knowing. Ellen unfolded another scrap, her voice breaking as she read. Promise me, we'll forgive quickly, even when it's hard. She closed her eyes, tears falling. I never realized how often this shaped us. Even when we failed, the effort was there. The younger cousins exchanged wide-eyed glances. For them, the idea that a simple bench could carry decades of family history was astonishing. Emma smiled gently at them. This is why truth matters. Not to dwell on the past, but to let it guide the future. The family sat together on the grass, circling the bench. Margaret, frail but luminous in the evening light, lifted her voice. "Your grandfather believed promises kept us alive. He said when the world shakes, a vow is the handrail we hold on to. And he was right. This bench is our handrail." Emma asked softly, "Then what do we promise now?" For a moment, silence lingered. Then Sarah spoke. "Promise we won't let silence divide us again." David added, "Promise we'll honor the truths of our past, no matter how heavy." Ellen wiped her tears. "Promise we'll teach the children that love is stronger than pride." One by one, voices joined until the air itself seemed to hum with commitment. Emma pulled a small notebook from her bag. "Let's write these new promises, not to bury them this time, but to keep them alive." She tore out pages, passing them around. Soon the family was scribbling words, laughter mingling with tears. They placed the papers in the tin box once more, but instead of hiding it under the soil, Emma set it proudly on the bench. "This time," she said, "we don't need to bury our vows. We live them in the open." As twilight deepened, Margaret leaned on her cane and stood before the bench. Her voice trembled, but her eyes glowed. "Your grandfather once told me that even if he didn't come back, he'd always be here. Tonight I feel him sitting with us. I feel every promise we made, every promise we kept, and even the ones we failed. And I feel peace." The family bowed their heads. The bench creaked softly in the evening breeze, as though acknowledging the moment. Emma placed a hand on the backrest. "This bench isn't just wood. It's memory. It's proof that love can be carved into the world and remain, even when people are gone. Our task is to listen, to carry those promises forward." She looked around the circle, at faces lit by candlelight in love, and knew the garden was no longer overgrown with silence. It was alive again with stories, with truth, with the strength of promises that had endured. On Monday, the garden smelled of rain and cut grass. Emma carried a small toolbox, sandpaper, a brush, and a tin of oil. Her mother brought cloths and a pitcher of water. David arrived with a narrow book he had bought at the stationer's, its cover stamped in gold, "Family Promises." Margaret followed last, leaning on her cane, a shawl across her shoulders. They gathered beneath the oak as if answering a summons. The oak answered with a hush, leaves whispering above them like a benediction tonight, softly. The bench looked older in daylight, its paint gone, the grain silvered and soft. Emma kneeled and worked along the backrest, lifting a film of weather and dust. The carved initials brightened, so did the thin line of words just below them. "Always here." She felt the letters rise beneath her fingertips. A pulse. "Easy," Margaret said. "Wood remembers. Treat it kindly, and it speaks." They cleaned in silence, sharing work. Ellen rinsed the cloths. David turned the tin notes onto a tray to dry. Emma rubbed oil along the slats until the color deepened to honey. When the bench was ready, they stood back and looked. It was still worn, still honest, but no longer neglected. It looked like something kept. Ellen opened the new book. "If we are to live our promises in the open, we should write them where everyone can see." She wrote the date on the first page. Then she wrote, "We will not let silence do our talking." David added, "We will tell the truth with tenderness." Emma wrote, "We will return here each year and remember." Margaret held the pen longest. Her hand shook. She wrote, "I will forgive myself for the years I could not sit here." They sat, four across, careful of the fresh oil. Children drifted down the path, cousins whispered, neighbors waved. Emma read the older notes aloud. Laughter met the small, sweet promises. Tears met the ones that had cost to keep. No one turned away. At noon, David fetched a slender chisel. "There's one more thing," he said. He knelt and traced the faded line beneath the initials. With taps, he sharpened the letters until Always Here looked clear again. He stepped aside for Emma, who added an arrow pointing toward the garden. "So the words face the world," she said, "not only the past." They ate late under the oak, passing plates and stories. Margaret told how the bench had been a refuge during long shifts, lean winters, and celebrations that never made it into albums. Ellen admitted she had avoided the bench because she confused strength with not feeling. "I thought moving forward meant never looking back," she said. "Now I know forward has roots." When the table was cleared, Emma walked to the far bed where grass had overgrown the roses. She cut away dead cane and found one bud hiding beneath leaves. She carried it to the bench and set the pot beside the leg where the tin box had once been buried. "For what grows after us," she said. "Not hidden, but tended." Margaret touched the bud. "Your grandfather would have liked that." The sun slid lower. People drifted home. The four of them remained. Emma opened the book to a blank page. "There is still one promise I want us all to make," she said. "It isn't dramatic. It's daily. When we speak, we will choose words that help us come back to this bench, whatever bench we share, rather than drive each other away." They signed. The page looked simple and brave. A breeze came through the oak, lifting the fringe of Margaret's shawl. She said, "I kept many promises in this garden. I broke a few. The ones I broke taught me why I needed the rest." She patted the seat. "This wood forgave me faster than I forgave myself." Ellen reached for her mother's hand. "Then today can be the day we forgive the old silences." "It can," Margaret said. "It is." Dusk gathered in the garden, the air bright, with small moths and the soft sound of sprinklers from a neighbor's yard. The bench carried the weight of them easily, as if it had been waiting for that exact combination of bodies, names, and newly steady hearts. Emma looked into the camera she had propped on a tripod near the path. "If you're listening," she said, "ask yourself what object in your family has been keeping watch. Maybe it's a bench, a recipe card, a book with notes in the margins. Sit with it. Let it speak. If there is a promise you need to rebuild, start where you are, with what you have." She closed the book and set it on the seat. "Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If it found you at the right time, subscribe and turn on notifications. And if there's a promise living quietly in your home, tell us in the comments. Words said aloud are easier to keep." They rose together. Margaret traced the initials once more, then kissed her fingertips and pressed them to the letters. "Always here," she said, smiling. They followed the path back toward the house, and the bench kept its patient watch, ready for the next evening, the next return, the next promise spoken where the garden could hear.